Sunlight in Her Eyes. Part 1. Ethan had always been the kind of person who lived quietly, a student of literature, who preferred books over parties, rain over noise, and calm evenings over crowded rooms. He had a small notebook that he carried everywhere, filled with unfinished stories, random thoughts, and lines of poetry he never showed to anyone. That spring, the university campus was covered in blossoms. The air smelled of fresh grass and lilacs, and the sky stretched endlessly above the old stone buildings. It was the season when everything came alive again. Trees, laughter, and even dreams. And that's when he saw her. It was a Friday afternoon. Ethan had just left the library with an armful of books when he heard faint music somewhere behind the building. A soft, cheerful tune played from a phone speaker. Curious, he followed the sound and turned the corner. There, in the small green garden behind the library, a girl was dancing barefoot. She moved lightly, as if the wind itself carried her. Her long hair shimmered in the sunlight, and her white dress fluttered like a cloud around her knees. There was no audience, no stage, just her, the grass, and the sun. Ethan froze. He didn't mean to stare, but it felt as if time had paused just for this moment. The world around her seemed brighter, quieter, like a painting come to life. When the song ended, she stopped, laughed softly to herself, and sat down on the grass. That laugh, it sounded like sunlight, too. Ethan took a quiet breath and finally spoke. "Excuse me," he said shyly. "Was that part of a performance?" She looked up at him, surprised but smiling. "No, I just felt like dancing," she replied. "Do you always interrupt girls who dance alone?" He laughed nervously. "Only the ones who look like they're in a dream." Her smile widened. "Then maybe you just walked into one." They talked for hours. Her name was Lily, a music student who loved jazz, rainstorms, and sketching people when they weren't looking. Ethan told her about his writing, his love for poetry, and his obsession with coffee. When they finally realized how late it had gotten, the sun was setting, painting the sky with pink, gold, and orange. Lily stood up, brushing grass from her dress. "Same time tomorrow?" she asked casually. Ethan smiled. "I'll bring the coffee." She grinned. "I'll bring the music." And just like that, something began, something that felt both new and familiar, like a song he'd known his whole life but had only now learned the words to. The next evening, Ethan was already waiting in the garden, holding 2 cups of coffee. Lily arrived with a small speaker and a mischievous smile. "Ready?" she asked. "For what?" "For dancing, of course." Ethan blinked. "I don't dance." "Then it's about time you learn," she said, grabbing his hand. The first few steps were clumsy. He stepped on her foot. She laughed so hard she almost fell, and soon they were both breathless with laughter. When the song ended, she rested her head on his shoulder for a brief second, and the world stopped spinning. From that day on, they met every evening behind the library. It became their place hidden from the world where time moved slower. Sometimes Lily brought her sketchbook and drew while Ethan read aloud from his favorite books. Sometimes they sat quietly, listening to the rustle of leaves. Other days, they just talked about dreams, fears, childhood stories, and silly things like which ice cream flavor was superior. Ethan had never known that happiness could be so simple. A shared smile, a soft laugh, a sunset reflected in someone's eyes. One evening, as they watched the sky turn golden, Lily said softly, "You know, I used to think love had to be complicated, like in movies full of drama and pain." Ethan turned to her. "And now?" "Now I think it's supposed to be peaceful," she said. "Like this." He nodded. "Maybe the right person doesn't make your heart race. They make it rest." She smiled that radiant, honest smile that could warm even the coldest day. Exactly. As spring melted into summer, their bond deepened. They explored the city together, wandering through old bookstores, trying strange foods, and riding bikes late at night when the streets were empty. Once, they got caught in the rain near the river. Lily threw her arms out and started spinning. "Come on, Ethan," she laughed. "It's just water." He shook his head at first, but her laughter was contagious. Soon they were both dancing in the downpour, soaked and laughing so hard it hurt. When they finally stopped, Ethan looked at her, her hair dripping, her eyes sparkling, and whispered, "I think you're the happiest person I've ever met." Lily leaned in closer. "Maybe because I'm with you." As days turned into weeks, Ethan realized something: Lily wasn't just part of his world anymore. She was his world. Every word he wrote now had her in it. Every dream began with her laughter. But she never asked for grand gestures or promises. She just wanted to live, to love freely, laugh loudly, and dance under the sky. And he loved her exactly for that. One warm evening, they were lying on the grass, staring at the stars. Lily turned to him and asked, "What's your dream, Ethan? The big one?" He thought for a moment. "To write something real, something that makes people feel." "And what would it be about?" He smiled. "About a girl who dances barefoot behind a library." Lily laughed softly. "That sounds familiar." "It's a good story," he said. "It's the best story," she whispered, resting her head on his chest. That night, Ethan walked home with his notebook open, writing as he went. On the first page, he wrote just one line: "She was sunlight in motion, and I was lucky enough to be caught in her glow." He didn't know what their future would hold, whether they would stay together forever or drift apart someday, but that didn't matter. Because sometimes love isn't about forever. It's about the moments that change who you are. And Lily had changed everything. The next morning, as he passed the garden again, the sunlight was dancing through the trees just like before. And he smiled because somewhere in the city, Lily was probably dancing too, her feet touching the earth lightly, her heart open, her eyes full of sunlight. And Ethan knew one thing for sure: He would never stop writing about her. Sunlight in Her Eyes. Part 2. The Life We Built. The years rolled forward like a gentle river, smooth, steady, and full of light. Time never dimmed the feeling Ethan had every time he saw Lily. She still danced, still filled the room with laughter, and still made ordinary days feel like tiny miracles. They moved into a small apartment with wide windows and too many plants. Morning sunlight poured through the curtains, painting the walls golden. Lily filled every space with warmth, with music, with flowers, with the scent of fresh pancakes and coffee. Ethan often said, "You don't just live here, Lily. You make the walls breathe." And she'd laugh, kissing his cheek. "That's because I don't live in a house. I live with you." Lily's dance studio was her dream come true. It was small but full of energy walls covered in mirrors, posters, and notes from her students. She taught children, teenagers, even grandparents who wanted to move again. Her rule was simple. Don't dance to impress, dance to feel alive. Ethan would sometimes stop by after work, leaning against the doorway as he watched her teach. Her movements were as graceful as ever, her laughter contagious. When their eyes met across the room, she'd wink and he'd blush like a teenager all over again. At home, Ethan wrote stories, soft, heartfelt tales inspired by their life together. He'd write about sunlight, music, and quiet moments of joy. His stories began to reach people. Readers said his words made them feel hope again. When Lily read them, she always smiled. "They're not about us, are they?" she teased. Ethan grinned. "Maybe not exactly, but you're in every sentence." One Friday evening, Lily came home late from her studio. Her hair was tied up, her dress had a trace of paint from the kids' art day, and she looked absolutely radiant. Ethan was sitting on the couch, reading. "Dance with me," she said suddenly. He blinked. "Now?" "Yes, right now, before dinner, no excuses." She played a soft jazz song, the same one she'd danced to behind the library years ago. Ethan stood, wrapped his arms around her, and they began to move. The living room lights were low and the golden sunset spilled through the window. The world outside faded away. It was just the two of them, swaying gently, heartbeat to heartbeat. "You still step on my foot," she teased. "And you still smell like sunshine," he whispered. She laughed, and the sound filled the whole room with joy. On weekends, they explored. They took small road trips with no plans, just music, snacks, and the open road. Sometimes they stopped by a lake and went swimming. Other times, they found little villages, talked to strangers, and bought handmade crafts they didn't really need. They took pictures of everything, not to post anywhere, but to keep for themselves. In one photo, Lily is laughing so hard she's out of focus. In another, Ethan is holding her hand while she tries to feed a deer. Their joy was real messy, silly, honest. They didn't chase perfection. They built happiness from the small, real things that life gave them. One cold December evening, Ethan brought Lily back to their old university garden, the place where they first met. The air smelled like snow, and the trees sparkled with frost. "Ethan, what are we doing here?" she asked, smiling. He took her hands gently and looked into her eyes. "Do you remember the first time we danced here?" "How could I forget? You were terrible," she laughed. He chuckled. "Still am. But I've been practicing one thing." Before she could ask what, Ethan dropped to one knee, pulled out a small box, and said softly, "Will you dance with me forever?" Lily's eyes filled with joy, not tears. "You didn't even let me say yes before I started crying," she laughed, though her voice trembled with happiness. "Yes, Ethan, 1,000 times yes." Snow began to fall as they hugged, and somewhere in the distance, music played, or maybe it was just their hearts beating together. Their wedding was simple, full of laughter. Lily wore a flower crown instead of a veil. Ethan forgot half of his speech, but it didn't matter, his eyes said everything. When they danced for the first time as husband and wife, everyone clapped and cheered. But for them, the world was silent. It was the same feeling they'd shared behind the library. Years ago, the quiet, beautiful magic of being together. Life didn't always stay perfect. There were stressful days, deadlines, and bills. But love made every burden lighter. They learned to solve problems with patience, to argue softly, to forgive quickly. On quiet nights, they would lie side by side, holding hands, whispering about their dreams. Lily wanted to travel to Italy. Ethan wanted to write a book in a seaside cottage. They promised to do both someday. And they did. Years later, they traveled from Paris to Venice, from snowy mountains to golden deserts. Lily danced on every street they visited, barefoot when she could, laughing at how people stopped to watch. Ethan always followed with his camera, capturing every twirl, every smile. When they finally returned home, older and calmer, they sat together on their balcony one evening, sipping tea as the sunset painted the sky orange. Lily rested her head on Ethan's shoulder. "Do you ever think about how lucky we are?" she asked softly. He smiled. "Every day. You turned my life into music. And you turned mine into a story," she said. He took her hand, kissed it, and whispered, "Then let's keep writing it." Years passed again. The plants in their apartment grew tall, the photo frames multiplied, and the laughter never stopped. Every morning, Ethan woke up to the smell of coffee and the sound of Lily humming. Sometimes he'd find her dancing in the kitchen, barefoot as always, her hair glowing in the sunlight. "Still dancing?" he'd tease. "Still watching?" she'd reply with a smile. And every time he looked at her, every single time he thought, "She's still the sunlight in my eyes."